Redditors who learned English as a second language, what new word or concept blew your mind? I used to think the words jungle and forest were interchangeable because my native language only had one word for a wooded area. When I came to Canada, I told people I saw deer in the jungle near my house. Needless to say, everyone including me, was incredibly confused. Moose, the Canadian king of the jungle. There's no word for shallow in French. You have to say not deep. As a German, the word eventually got me pretty good and made a lot of books really awkward. It does not at all translate to the German eventual, which means maybe probably. So in a lot of stories the ending was like so he came to peace with it eventually or he died eventually, and I was always like frick you guys with your open-ended and sure balls. In French, eventually, eventuellement, means perhaps, if there's no alternative. Lots of false friends like that. Manslaughter was one of the words where I kept asking myself whether it needed to be so dramatic. Considering it's supposed to be one of the lightest ways to have killed someone, it is super harsh. I remember listening to Rednecks as a kid and tried to translate the lyrics for fun. The phrase "I miss you like heck and I'm feeling blue" was a real head scratcher. Who would miss heck? And how can you feel colors? I am abroad for the first time in my life, and living with a bunch of non-native English speakers. I never realized how many things like this we say. It is rarely the big words that trip up the non-native speakers when I talk. I don't use that many of them, and especially not around ESL people. I don't even think about the weird crap we say though. French speaker here. I was surprised that English has a word for intentionally setting a building on fire. Arson. Then again, French has a word for dine and dash. Gravellerie. I don't know what that says about the respective cultures. It's funny because if you asked me what language I thought the word arson came from, I would have guessed French. Native English speaker myself, but I really enjoyed the night during college when me and some other guys at the bar tried to explain to my friend, native Hindi speaker, the difference between this beer is crap and this beer is the crap. Still don't know if he thought we were all in on a massive practical joke. I worked in a chip shop when I was a teenager and there was this Afghan guy called Mustafa. He turned to me one day and just out of the blue said, "Steve, I'm so freaking boring." He asked me to start teaching him better English after I stopped laughing. Dive. This word is the past tense of dive, and the name for a bird and both pronounced differently. Why is this not two different words? Russian speaker here. I love all the so-called modal verbs in English. May, must, should, have to, might, could, ought to, needn't, etc. There's so much more meaning in these than in the Russian equivalents, although, strictly speaking, there are no equivalents of these verbs in Russian for the most part. Sometimes when speaking Russian I'd be looking for a way to say something like I may or may not be there, and dang, all you can say is maybe I'll be there, maybe not. Should is inexpressible in one word in Russian, and is often close in meaning to need to. I should have known is probably best expressed in Russian as darn it. Why didn't I know that before? etc etc. Likewise, sometimes I really need an article in Russian. I mean the Russian has no articles, and there's sometimes confusion about which object the speaker is talking. Clarification is then needed, etc. This could have been avoided by using an article. Russian has no articles. Well, that explains a lot about the stereotypical English with a Russian accent. Cool. 1. Supposed to meant to. I'm like, who supposes them? These expressions seem to be based on inherent purposes or this is how it has to be. Fate-like ideas. It's quite hard to translate to Hungarian. 2. The many meanings of wrong and how universal it is. You can say it is wrong too. Do you mean it's not allowed, not moral, not practical or what? In Hungarian we have words corresponding to sinful, forbidden, bad, improper, but wrong is much more universal, and it is still strange for me. The word cringe. There's not a direct translation to Portuguese and I honestly can't think about any expression of 2 or more words that translates what cringe is about so well. It's good because it describes this feeling so well. In England we have 37 different words for cringe, awkwardness, embarrassment, self-consciousness, etc. P, as used in Australia. P equals urinate. P equals beer. On the P equals drinking a lot of beer. P equals drunk too much beer alcohol. Taking the P equals making fun of someone. P off equals angry. P off equals left. P off equals frick off. P in the wind equals having no impact. Pisshead equals alcoholic. I thought I could speak English quite well until I spent a night in an Australian bar getting an education on P. We have more words than P, mate. You're in for a treat. The way that you can use any verb pretty much any way you like. An expression like he couldn't act his way out of a paper bag to refer to someone who's a bad actor would be impossible to build in Portuguese. Also how versatile the word frick is. Fricking because it can fricking go anywhere in a fricking sentence and it still fricking makes fricking sense. The difference between butt dial and booty call. This is my favorite on here, and I'm a native English speaker. Awkward. There's nothing like it in French. The only thing that comes even close is embarrassant, embarrassing, and it sounds uptight and formal. If you say something like the job interview was a bit embarrassing, you sound like a diva. Awkward just conveys that something is a bit upsetting but not enough to be a serious problem. It's just a word that lacks in French, like schadenfreude or sordide. Does not translate. In Quebec, saying malaise the same way as one would say awkward works. Malaisant would be the closest term, although it sounds a tad more formal than awkward. Self-conscious. I found no equivalent in French and it was spot on describing how I felt a lot at the time. Complexe. Not really a concept, but the almost onomatopoeic way in which nouns in English indicate the word's meaning. Roar, slap, snap, splash, scratch, smack, creak, squeak, click, toot, thanks Mr. Skeltel, slip, bump, knock, drip, yap, thump. It could go on forever. The word read. I am going to read the book that you read yesterday. Same word, different pronunciation and meaning. Silent letters. Omitting some letters in a word. For example, salmon is pronounced salmon, 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 etc. Not salmon. Knife is not kh knife, it's just knife. Same thing with knee, subtle, Wednesday, nor, core, etc. Korean is a phonetic language, so I was used to pronouncing every letter in a word. Also, plurals are very confusing sometimes. Why not deers, sheeps, and fishes? Just because? My native language only has 3 tenses, past, present and future. What else do you need? Or so I thought, until I took an intermediate advanced level English class in my junior year in high school and the teacher told us we were expected to know all 12 tenses in and out by the end of the first month. I was one of the only people in the class who only started learning English in high school. Most of the others already had intermediate language exams, even. So I was the only one caught off guard by this. I'd never heard of there being 12 tenses. Up until then, we had only used like 3 or 4. And my previous English lessons were 90% in my native language and 10% in English, while this new teacher refused to say a word in any language but English. It took a bit to get used to it and wrap my head around the logic behind the tenses, but I managed. Till there are 12 tenses in English. As a native speaker, this blows my mind. Didn't blow my mind, but one thing I can think of that I really like about the English language is that unlike Icelandic, which only has one word for a relative, Frandi English gives distinction as to what kind of relative exactly it is. Cousin, uncle, aunt. Icelandic only has 2. Frandi for male, Franka for female. For example, I have 2 relatives with the name Hannes. One is a cousin, the other is an uncle. If I refer to one or the other, I have to go out of my way to explain which one. Not me, my husband. He immigrated here from Slovakia with his parents when he was young, and while they speak English now, they have a thick accent. He grew up thinking homondeks was a traditional Slovakian dish when it was in fact just ham and eggs. He was nearly an adult when he realized this. I taught English as a second language, and the lesson on phrasal verbs blew my mind. I never realized that my vocabulary contained hundreds of verb preposition combinations whose meaning is fairly arbitrary and memorized for each combination. I've studied a few other languages, and I'm not sure if others have nearly as many of these things. It was a very frustrating lesson for my students. Take the word take up, take down, take in, take out, take on, take off all have 6 separate unrelated meanings. They're not even opposites, they're just 6 things you have to memorize if you want to understand English. What blew my mind is that your mother's brother, mother's sister's husband, father's brother and father's sister's husband are all called the same word, uncle. In Indian languages each is different word and some even make the distinction between father's older brother versus younger. The word folklore has been borrowed in my native language, Arabic, from English, but when I realized it was folk, people, plus lore stories it blew my mind. When I was first learning English, I had a lot of trouble with articles, which my native language lacks completely. Why do you always need to put these essentially meaningless little words in front of the actual words themselves? Take for example the sentence "the sun is shining." Do you really have to use a word to specify that you're talking about that same sun that has always been there? Why not just say sun is shining and trust you'd be saying something totally different if a new sun somehow appeared? That, and why is there no plural indefinite article? Plural indefinite article is some. There are some cars. The definite article reduces ambiguity. Cucumber. Honestly, I'm 100% Mexican, and when I first heard the word and I knew it was one of my favorite things to eat, still is, it blew my mind. I love how you can use goodnight or goodbye as an adverb, as in kiss someone goodnight or wave him goodbye. Just as a kiss can be soft or tender or playful, it can be goodnight. Kiss him softly, kiss him tenderly, kiss him playfully, kiss him goodnight. It's like it used to be to wish him a good night, but then they said frick grammar and just used a shortcut. Till that the French language lacks a lot of words for things commonly used in English. OT. Not long ago I realized that we don't have a word in Danish for pith, which is the white stuff under the peel of an orange. There is no word for marshmallow in Russian. First time I saw one I refused to eat it because my parents couldn't tell me what they were. Also fun tidbit, the word for bow as in bow and arrow, and onion, is the same in Russian. Manhole, just sounds not right. This post reminds of a Brazilian guy I worked with who spoke little English. He made an error in the lab I worked in and felt really bad about it, so he went to talk to the manager. But instead of saying boss, I fricked up. We had pretty chill bosses. He said boss, I made big crap. The look of regretful sadness on the Brazilian guy's face made my boss think that he had actually crapped somewhere he wasn't supposed to. The communication breakdown and finally figuring out what was going on was hilarious. Without a doubt, sperm whale. I cannot even begin to comprehend how this word was accepted as official. Also awkward cause I always spell it wrong. Made an effort here, and gerrymandering. The inside of their heads is filled with goo that resembles semen. Strip mall. I was so confused why people took their children to some weird kind of erotic mall. Perpendicular. I don't know why, I just love that word. Envy and jealousy being separate words. It took me a bit to remember which is which. As an American whose first language is English, my mind was blown the first time I visited the UK and had my passport stamped granting me leave to enter. In Danish we have his word kæreste, which is both boyfriend and girlfriend, like the word partner except straight people uses it. Kæreste actually means dearest, like my dearest of all. I suddenly realize that this is not a valid answer to the question. Sorry. The word trade-off. When I learned it first as a student, I was amazed how much information can be passed on, especially in engineering domain, by simply saying, it's a trade-off. Technically these are two words forming an idiom. We have tons of these in English, so all bets are off. Nightmare, my native language, strangely, doesn't have a word for it. Not mind-blowing, but still made me think. Banter. There's nothing in German that really matches it, and it is so wonderfully phonetic. Banter. MHMM. The different pronunciation of Kansas and Arkansas still blows my mind. I remember being flabbergasted by two weird expressions. One was X is referred to as Y. English in general has much more passive voice compared to Russian, so it's probably nothing special for a native speaker. It's like, people usually call it Y, but it took a while to wrap my head around the logic here. Second one is an idiom provided that, like, we'll do it, provided that we get paid. What the frick is this crap? Once again, the logic is out there and it can be grasped, but it really defies understanding at first. The last one also reminded me about another particular set of lead-ins like granted, arguably, etc. Very convenient and powerful way to paint the following phrase that is sorely missing in Russian. Roadkill. Running over animals is not very common where I live, but it seems every southern uncle and their mother has done it. Not my fault squirrels and possums are dumbasses. I learned a week ago that after watching so many series where they sugarcoat it, it actually was sugar-coated. I was a bit sad. I mean, sugarcoat would make sense too, right? A way to communicate with only nice things. It refers to nasty tasting medicine, where they coat the pill in sugar so you can swallow it without it tasting like a rotting cat's butthole. I'm looking at you, spironolactone. So someone metaphorically sugar-coating something is making a nasty piece of news or a bad story sound better nicer, but the dark context is still inside. You have been visited by the dinner doggo. Good and also tasty stir fries will come to you if you comment. Thanks for the recipe, dinner doggo. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.